Margaret Bennet had always considered herself a calm and steady woman. She lived in a cozy house in Seattle, the kind of place where the rain tapped softly against the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee welcomed anyone who walked in. It was a quiet Sunday morning, and the house was still wrapped in the gentle hush that only rainy weekends could bring. She was walking up the stairs to call her son, Ethan, for breakfast when she noticed the half-open door of his room. Curiosity nudged her forward, and then she saw them. Ethan wasn't alone. Sitting close to him was Emily, their next-door neighbor's daughter. They were talking quietly, leaning toward each other, their hands brushing occasionally. It was innocent enough at a glance, but the closeness, the way they looked at each other, the quiet laughter, it all hinted at something deeper. Margaret froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected to feel such a sharp twinge in her chest. Ethan, her little boy who had once run to her with scraped knees and broken toys, was now a young man experiencing love for the first time. It was strange and almost painful to watch, as if a part of her childhood had been quietly swept away. She didn't interrupt them. She didn't make a sound. She simply stepped back and closed the door slowly, her mind spinning with emotions she couldn't quite name. There was pride, yes, but also an unexpected sting of nostalgia. Seeing her son like this was a sudden reminder of how quickly time moved, and how fast children grew up. Margaret made her way back downstairs, trying to calm herself. She kept telling herself it was normal, that it was beautiful even, but she couldn't shake the flutter of emotions that filled her chest. Breakfast was already on the table, the aroma of eggs and toast mixing with the faint scent of the rain outside. Ethan appeared a few minutes later, smiling shyly, carrying the energy of someone who had just crossed a threshold into a new chapter of life. Margaret decided to approach the situation carefully. "So? Emily seems nice," she said, keeping her tone light and casual. She hoped it didn't sound too probing, though inside she was fighting to keep her own curiosity in check. Ethan paused, a hint of surprise crossing his face, followed by a shy smile. "Yeah, Mum, she's special," he said softly. Margaret nodded, forcing a small smile onto her lips, though inside her thoughts were racing. She wanted to ask more, to know what they had shared in the quiet of his room, but she restrained herself. There was a part of her that wanted to protect this moment for him, to let him experience love without interference, even as another part of her longed to step in and understand it all immediately. The morning continued with small talk, the usual chatter about school, homework, and weekend plans. Margaret's mind, however, wandered constantly back to the glimpse she had seen. The image of her son and Emily, their faces close, their hands touching lightly, lingered in her thoughts. It was a strange mix of emotions: happiness for him, nostalgia for the past, and an unnameable ache that came from witnessing the inevitable passage of time. She realized that moments like these were fleeting, delicate, and should be handled with care. Her instincts as a mother told her to stay calm, to support silently, and to let him navigate this part of life at his own pace. Margaret also reflected on how much Ethan had changed. He was no longer the little boy who clung to her hand in the grocery store or cried when scraped knees required bandages and comfort. He was growing into a man with feelings, desires, and choices of his own. That realization brought a bittersweet pang to her heart. She understood that watching a child grow up meant stepping back, letting them make mistakes, and learning to trust that the guidance she had given over the years had prepared them for moments like this. As the rain continued to fall outside, Margaret found herself thinking about her own life, her own experiences with love, and the ways in which she had learned to embrace both joy and loss. Seeing Ethan's first tender steps into romance reminded her of her younger years, of the exhilaration and vulnerability that love always carried. It was a quiet lesson in watching life unfold, in noticing the subtle shifts in those she loved, and in finding joy in their happiness while accepting the inevitable changes that came with time. By the time breakfast ended, Margaret had made an internal decision. She would support Ethan quietly, with patience and understanding. She would allow him to explore his feelings, to learn about himself and others, and to experience the kind of gentle romance that, although sometimes confusing, was also profoundly beautiful. She knew that she would have moments of reflection, of longing for the days when he was small and dependent. But she also understood that this was the natural order of life, a cycle of growth, love, and emotional discovery. Margaret moved through the rest of her morning with a sense of calm determination. She poured another cup of coffee, glanced out at the rain-soaked street, and thought about the quiet strength it took to let children find their own way. Her heart was still stirred by the sight of Ethan and Emily, yet it was no longer anxious or conflicted. It was tender, accepting, and full of cautious hope. She recognized that what she had witnessed was not a threat or a problem, but a beautiful evolution of life and love, one that would shape her son into the man he was becoming. In the end, Margaret knew that mornings like these, full of quiet surprises and emotional revelations, were fleeting but precious. She held onto the image of her son, hand in hand with Emily, not with fear or worry, but with a deep and abiding sense of love. It was a moment that would stay with her, a gentle reminder of how quickly life moved, how love grew in small, unexpected ways, and how a mother's heart could embrace both pride and nostalgia without losing its balance. This was the beginning of a chapter she hadn't anticipated, but one she was willing to experience fully, quietly, and with an open heart, ready for whatever came next. Her heart, stirred and tender, knew one thing clearly. Love, in all its forms, was inevitable, and sometimes the most meaningful moments came from simply watching, waiting, and feeling alongside those you cherish the most. Margaret Bennett couldn't shake the image of Ethan and Emily from her mind. Even as the rain cleared and sunlight filtered through the clouds, her thoughts stayed tangled in the quiet moment she had witnessed. The memory of her son's shy smile, the way his hand brushed Emily's, the tenderness in their laughter. It all lingered, making her heart feel both full and fragile. It wasn't just pride she felt. It was a rush of memories she had carefully tucked away. Memories of love, loss, and longing that had shaped her in ways she didn't always acknowledge. Years ago, Margaret had known that same look of intense, innocent affection, the kind of love that made your heart race and your world feel larger than it really was. She had it once with her late husband David. They had met in high school, two young hearts drawn together by curiosity, humor, and shared dreams. Their love had grown quietly but steadily, filling small apartments with laughter, late-night conversations, and simple touches that spoke more than words ever could. They had built a life together, modest but rich in connection, until fate intervened. David's sudden passing 5 years earlier had left her adrift, navigating a home full of memories that whispered of what was lost. Seeing Ethan and Emily together had stirred something deep and unexpected. It wasn't envy. It wasn't regret. It was longing. Longing for the warmth, connection, and certainty of love she had once known. Her own life had continued, filled with routines, work, and quiet evenings alone. But Margaret realized she had been surviving more than truly living. Witnessing her son experience the spark of first love reminded her of the vibrancy she had once felt and had quietly let slip away. The day passed in a blur of ordinary tasks, but her mind wandered constantly. She found herself replaying that moment over and over, examining every gesture, every glance, every whispered word she had overheard. It was a strange mixture of joy and melancholy, watching someone else's love ignite while she confronted the spaces in her own life that felt empty. She couldn't tell anyone about it. Not Ethan, not a friend, not even her sister. It was a personal reckoning. A private reflection that she had to navigate on her own. By evening, Margaret knew she needed to step outside, to clear her mind and breathe in the world beyond her house. She grabbed her coat and walked to the nearby lake, a place that had always held significance for her and David. The rain had left the air crisp and fresh, and the water reflected the muted glow of the evening sky. The familiar path along the shore brought memories rushing back. Picnics with David, quiet conversations about dreams, and even the playful teasing that had been a hallmark of their relationship. Margaret's heart ached, but it was also comforting. It reminded her that love, once found, left traces that never fully disappeared. As she walked, she noticed someone sitting on a bench by the water. Thomas, a familiar face from her book club, was there with a notebook in hand. He looked up, smiled, and gestured for her to join him. Margaret hesitated, but something in his calm presence felt grounding. They began to talk about novels, favorite authors, and the small absurdities of life. Their conversation flowed easily, the kind of effortless connection that Margaret hadn't realized she had been craving. For the first time in years, she laughed without restraint, feeling a lightness that had been absent from her life since David's passing. It was comforting, warm, and surprising all at once, a reminder that life could still offer unexpected moments of joy. Meanwhile, back at home, Ethan paced nervously in his room. The previous morning had been awkward in the gentlest way. His mother's quiet observation had left him unsettled. He had wanted to share more about Emily, but something about Margaret's calm demeanor had made him hesitate. Now, he couldn't stop thinking about her reaction, about whether she understood, about whether he was doing the right thing. He pulled out his phone, typing messages to Emily, erasing them, typing again, unsure how to express the flood of feelings within him. His heart was racing with the intensity of first love, but also with the weight of responsibility. The knowledge that love often required courage. When Margaret returned home, she found Ethan standing in the living room, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. He took a deep breath. "Mom," he said softly, "I think we need to talk about Emily." Margaret sensed his unease immediately. It wasn't just the typical worries of a young man in love. It was something heavier, something that suggested challenges beyond their personal feelings. She nodded gently, guiding him to sit beside her. Ethan explained that Emily's parents were hesitant about their relationship. They believed he was too young, too uncertain about his future, and had asked Emily to step back. His voice trembled as he spoke, not with fear, but with genuine disappointment. Margaret listened carefully, understanding that these were the first real obstacles of his emotional life. She reached out and took his hand, offering a steady reassurance. "Love isn't about being ready all at once, Ethan," she said. "It's about being honest with yourself and with the person you care about. You can't control everything, but you can control how sincerely you give yourself." Her words carried the weight of experience, the lessons learned through years of love, heartbreak, and resilience. Ethan nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Margaret suggested that he write a letter to Emily, a simple, heartfelt note explaining his feelings, his intentions, and his willingness to wait. It didn't have to be dramatic or perfect. It simply needed to be honest. He worked on the letter that evening, pouring his emotions into every word, feeling the relief that often comes from expressing the truth. When he left to deliver it the next day, Margaret stayed near the window, watching the rain-dimmed street. She thought about how love could both challenge and heal, how it demanded courage but also offered immense beauty. As the minutes passed, there was a soft knock at the door. Thomas was there again, umbrella in hand, offering his quiet presence and a smile that made her heart feel lighter. They spent the evening talking, sharing small stories, and enjoying the comfort of companionship. Margaret realized that she, too, was opening herself to new possibilities, rediscovering the warmth of human connection that she had almost forgotten. Across the street, Emily read Ethan's letter with tears in her eyes. It was not a letter of pressure or obligation, but of patience, respect, and sincerity. She felt the weight of his emotions and the truth of his words, and it strengthened her resolve to navigate her own path with courage. The connection between them was reaffirmed, not in grand gestures, but in quiet honesty and emotional openness. For Margaret, the days that followed were filled with reflection and subtle change. She felt her heart stirring with renewed empathy and understanding, not just for her son but for herself. Life, she realized, was moving forward, and she had a choice: to cling to the past or to embrace what was coming. The sight of Ethan and Emily, the return of laughter with Thomas, the quiet strength of sincerity in relationships, all of it reminded her that even after loss, life had room for love, growth, and hope. Margaret Bennett understood something profound. The heart's capacity for love was endless. She could nurture her son's journey while also allowing her own heart to awaken again. It was a delicate balance, but one she was ready to embrace. As the sun set over the lake, casting golden reflections across her home, Margaret felt a quiet sense of peace. The world was moving, love was alive in many forms, and she was ready to witness and participate in the beautiful unfolding of life. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, letter in hand, staring at the blank wall across from him. The words he had written to Emily seemed simple on the page, yet they carried the weight of everything he felt. He had poured his heart into that letter, expressing patience, honesty, and hope, yet doubt lingered in his mind. Would Emily understand? Would she be willing to wait, to trust that his feelings were real? Margaret watched him quietly from across the room, sensing the storm of emotions swirling inside him. She didn't rush to speak, because sometimes the greatest comfort was simply being present, letting someone navigate their own feelings with the assurance that they weren't alone. After a long pause, Ethan finally spoke. "Mom, what if it's not enough? What if she decides to follow her parents' wishes and we lose this chance?" His voice was soft, almost fragile, but Margaret recognized the raw honesty in it. She reached over and placed her hand on his. "Ethan, love isn't about guarantees. It's about courage. You're brave enough to express what you feel, and that matters more than the outcome. Life doesn't always give us certainty, but it does give us truth. And you've given her that truth." Her words seemed to settle something inside him. He nodded slowly, a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation filling his chest. Margaret realized that guiding someone through love wasn't about solving their problems or ensuring perfect outcomes. It was about offering perspective, reminding them of the values that mattered, and giving them the space to take their own steps. She remembered the lessons her own life had taught her. Love could be messy, unexpected, and even painful, but it was always transformative. That evening, Ethan left with the letter, walking briskly to Emily's house under the soft glow of the streetlights. The air was crisp, carrying a quiet promise of new beginnings. Margaret watched from the window, her mind drifting back to her own experiences with love, both the joy and the loss. She remembered the nights she had spent waiting, wondering if David would return from late meetings or if their plans would shift unexpectedly. Those memories no longer brought pain alone. They reminded her of resilience, of the quiet strength that comes from embracing life fully. Even when it's uncertain. Once Ethan had gone, Margaret leaned back against the counter, taking a deep breath. The house was unusually quiet, filled only with the faint ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. She found herself reflecting on her own emotional life, realizing that she had spent years compartmentalizing her feelings, keeping her heart in cautious reserve. But watching her son navigate his first true feelings of love had stirred something long dormant. It was a mixture of empathy, nostalgia, and the quiet awakening of her own desires for connection and companionship. As if in answer to the unspoken stirrings in her heart, there was a knock at the door. Thomas stood there, umbrella in hand, smiling with the easy warmth that Margaret had always found comforting. "Thought you might like some company," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Margaret welcomed him, feeling a sense of ease she hadn't experienced in years. They sat together in the living room, talking quietly, their conversation flowing effortlessly from books to travel, from memories to small, shared observations about the world. Laughter came naturally, gentle and unforced, filling the space that had felt hollow for far too long. Margaret realized, as she listened to Thomas speak, that connection didn't always come at the moment you expected. Sometimes it arrived quietly, unassumingly, filling the gaps left by loss or solitude. She felt the gentle pull of possibility, a hint of something new blossoming, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a life that included hope, companionship, and the quiet joy of being seen. Across the street, Emily read Ethan's letter with a mixture of surprise and relief. The words were straightforward yet heartfelt, expressing honesty and patience without any pressure. Emily's parents had worried about the future, about maturity and readiness, but Ethan's sincerity touched her deeply. She understood the bravery it took for him to write the letter and deliver it in person. It wasn't grand gestures or dramatic declarations that made love real. It was the quiet, consistent effort, the willingness to communicate honestly and care for one another's hearts. Reading the letter, Emily felt a renewed sense of connection, a reinforcement of the bond that had already begun to form between them. The next few days were filled with small, meaningful exchanges. Ethan and Emily began meeting in ways that respected her parents' concerns, talking in the park, sharing short walks, and leaving notes for one another. Margaret watched from a distance, offering gentle guidance when needed, but largely allowing them to navigate their emotions independently. She understood that the most enduring lessons of love often came from experience, not instruction. She reminded herself that patience and observation were sometimes more powerful than direct involvement. Meanwhile, Margaret continued spending time with Thomas. Their friendship deepened with each shared moment, each conversation that revealed layers of understanding and kindness. She found herself laughing more freely, feeling lighter, and noticing the subtle ways her heart responded to warmth and attention. It wasn't the impulsive, overwhelming rush of young love she had known with David. It was steadier, calmer, yet no less profound. It reminded her that love matured over time, that it could be both gentle and transformative, and that her capacity to feel deeply had not diminished with age. Ethan, too, began to change subtly. The act of expressing his feelings, of committing to honesty with Emily, gave him a newfound confidence. He walked taller, smiled more easily, and approached his studies with renewed focus. The letter had not only communicated his heart to Emily, but had also clarified his own understanding of what he truly valued in relationships: honesty, patience, and respect. Margaret observed these changes with quiet pride, recognizing that love could shape character in profound and meaningful ways. One evening, Margaret found herself standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the dim glow of the streetlights, reflecting on the week's events. Ethan's growth, Emily's sincerity, Thomas's companionship. Each element was a reminder of life's unpredictable beauty. She understood now that love could exist in many forms simultaneously. The first love of her child, the rekindling of her own heart, and the quiet bonds of friendship and trust that connected people in ways that were both subtle and powerful. Margaret felt a quiet sense of hope. The house, once still and shadowed with memories of loss, now carried a different energy. It hummed with life, with connection, with the promise that even after pain, hearts could heal and grow. The experiences of the past, the challenges of love, and the uncertainties of the present had converged to create a space where joy, care, and emotional depth could flourish. As the night deepened, Margaret sat back, allowing herself a moment of reflection. She realized that watching Ethan navigate his feelings, witnessing Emily's response, and opening her own heart to Thomas were all pieces of the same puzzle. The ongoing journey of life, love, and emotional growth. Each moment, no matter how small, had significance. Each choice carried weight. Each gesture had meaning. And each connection, whether young or renewed, was a thread weaving together the fabric of a life lived fully. By the time she went to bed, Margaret felt lighter, more present, and more attuned to the possibilities around her. She understood that love required courage, patience, and honesty, and that the most meaningful moments often came from embracing vulnerability without fear. The experiences of the past week had shifted something inside her, opening doors she hadn't realized were closed, and reminding her that life, even after loss and uncertainty, was always capable of offering new beginnings, new connections, and the quiet, transformative power of the heart.